Hello guys, welcome back to another video here. Today we'll be taking a look at the long range after Winter Storm Gale makes its exit a couple days after it affected the Northeast. Right now you can see here, depicted by the GFS, you have a trough in east and a trough in about the west area. This is the low of Winter Storm Gale, if I am correct, moving towards Europe, and then you have multiple troughs up in Canada here. You notice that you have a negative NAO in this area of Greenland, and then you also have a negative AO, which is Arctic oscillation. If we continue with the GFS here in the long range, you can see that the trough in the east starts to move out here. As shown right here, this is a trough moving out to the east. But then as that happens, right around Christmas, another trough starts to come down. You have big cold air coming down from Canada, and you also have a positive PNA out here in the west. You can see you have the Canadian connection dipping down into the east all the way back up into Canada here. If we continue, you can see that the energy drops down and tries to form a system, but then it really doesn't form that much. It creates a rainstorm for the most parts of the Northeast, at least on the coastal areas. But if you go upstate New York, upstate Pennsylvania, and parts of upper peninsula of Michigan and central Michigan, you'll get some snow out of this. Nothing as extreme as Winter Storm Gale. But if you continue here, back towards Christmas, you can see, let's go to the 23rd, you have a big trough coming down here. You have a little ridge that tries to set up over here, but that quickly gets out because you have a massive Arctic outbreak coming right here. This is cold Arctic air coming down from Canada. You have an NAO is trying to stay negative, which it should stay negative, and then you have a PNA that starts to come out from being negative that goes into positive. If we clear all of this up and go towards Christmas, you can see that this trough sets up right in the east and tries to form a snowstorm, believe it or not, for Christmas. Again, you have a big ridge out here by Greenland, but that starts to decay and tries to go back to neutral, but you still have this dominant positive PNA out here. But if you look by the isobars here, you can see that this drops all the way down to south of Florida and then all the way back up. This is a really cold shot of cold air coming down from the Arctic. You could really tell by it by the pressures right here, 507, 504, dipping all the way down, almost, actually the 507 mark dips all the way into almost northern and central Michigan. That is really cold air coming down for this time of the year, and this is Arctic air coming down. There's going to be a storm that forms on the front of that and then eventually makes a run up the Northeast. This is going to be a rain changing to snow event very rapidly here for parts of the Northeast. May even get down as snow for some parts of the coast here. It really all depends on where that coastal front sets up. As time goes by here, and you have a nice Christmas hopefully, that front eventually passes, but that cold regime stays. The PNA may not be here, but you can see the trough dips all the way down into here. You have the NAO staying negative, which is also causes cold air to come down into the Northeast, and then the PNA tries to come back, in which it does here. But then again, you still have troughing that stays in the Northeast. That stretches from Washington, goes down all the way to Texas, and all the way back up to here, up by the Canadian Maritimes. This is going to be a cold regime still. A negative NAO, a somewhat positive PNA, and then a negative AO. Now if we go to the end of the run here, you can see that troughing still shows, and you have a storm forming in the south. But then again, this is 384 hours, and I bet you by next run that is going to go away. You may ask, what's an NAO here? An NAO, when negative, you'll see this in a moment here, a negative NAO has a ridge up by Greenland, and then you get troughing that pushes all the way down into the US and central and eastern part of the US. The punishing cold, which is also called Arctic air, which we will have this Christmas at least, would stretch down all the way down into the Northeast. It would be really cold, and that's what causes your major snowstorms. An NAO at this time looks to be neutral, maybe slightly positive, but does not get very high if it wants to be positive. What's an NAO here? An NAO, when positive, sorry if this is a little small for you guys, but when negative, sorry if I said positive, you have a very deep trough that sets up in the central and eastern part of the US. And that's what we're going to have for Christmas here. you're going to have the punishing cold Arctic air come down into the north and central part of the US, and that could form storms wherever that line sets up. Now, would this line set up out on the coast and have a big nor'easter again for this part of the country? That at this time that seems unlikely. It looks like to set up right on the coast instead of being out here. This would mean pretty heavy snows for upstate New York and western parts of Pennsylvania, and maybe rain changing to snow for parts of the coast. If we look back to the AO here, you can see that it stays negative, tries to make a run for being positive, but does not succeed in that faith. It stays negative all the way until January, which it looks to be really cold by January. Now, a PNA. A PNA here is a ridge that sets up in the western part of the US. That drives that cold Arctic air from the Arctic region straight down into the US. Now, when you have a negative AO, which depicts on this map here, a high that sets up right by Greenland, that is two pretty warm air aloft going into the Arctic, that forces the cold down into the east. The PNA again is a ridge that forms in the western part of the Pacific and drives that Arctic air to south, east, and northeast. At this time, the PNA looks to go positive, try to go back into the negative range, but quickly bounces back to positive range by January. And this is, again, your PNA when positive. Now, this is the type of pattern that we're heading into. The AO is up in the Arctic, as depicted by this map, right here, right by the northern part of Canada and the Arctic region. The NAO is by Greenland and maybe just sometime south of that. When negative, it depicts cold air for the east. And this is where the PNA sets up. When this all comes together at the same time, you usually get an active subtropical jet and an active Arctic jet. The Arctic jet brings down the cold air from Canada and puts it in the central eastern part of the US, depending on the PNA, AO, and NAO. The subtropical jet brings your precipitation from all the way back as far as Hawaii, all the way up into the northeast. And when these two things combine, you have a big storm that usually forms. Could we possibly see this time in January, and maybe as early as late December? That forms a major nor'easter, possibly for the eastern part of the US? Only time will tell, but for now, remember, enjoy your Christmas and have a great holiday season.